There's a certain kind of person who walks into a room and instantly changes the atmosphere. They light it up. They make others laugh, feel comfortable, alive. They joke easily, smile often, and carry an energy that others find magnetic. These are the people we call the heart of the group, the clowns, the entertainers. But what if I told you that this very brightness often hides something else? Something quiet, buried, and unbearably heavy? Carl Jung understood that every personality, every persona we project into the world comes with a shadow. The more light a person brings to others, the darker the shadow they may carry within themselves. The funniest person in the room isn't just performing, they're protecting. Humor becomes a mask, and behind that mask is often a sadness so deep it doesn't have words, only silence. Let's talk about that silence, the one that shows up when the room clears, when the jokes end, when the performer is alone with their thoughts. In Jungian terms, this is the moment when the persona, the social face we wear, falls away, and the true self, the self, is exposed. For many who carry the clown archetype, their public self is built entirely on managing the emotions of others. They're attuned to tension, and they know how to disarm it. They sense discomfort and instinctively fill it with laughter. But when you spend your life deflecting attention from your own wounds by entertaining others, those wounds don't heal. They grow roots. You see, sadness doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like exaggerated joy. Sometimes it wears bright colors, talks loudly, makes everyone feel good, while feeling nothing inside. Jung believed that our neuroses often develop as a result of being disconnected from our true feelings. When your role in life is to be the funny one, your sadness becomes unacceptable. It has no place, so you push it into the unconscious, where it festers. And the longer you ignore it, the more it shapes you. There's also a deeper existential pain underneath this mask. Many of the funny people you meet are deeply intelligent, highly sensitive souls who have learned that the world doesn't always respond well to vulnerability. Somewhere along the line, they tried to express real emotion and were punished for it. Maybe they were laughed at when they cried. Maybe they were told to toughen up. Maybe they learned through trauma or rejection that sadness is a burden others don't want to carry. So they transformed it into something acceptable, laughter. They learned that if you make others laugh, they won't ask too many questions. They won't see the sadness in your eyes if you distract them with a joke. Jung would call this an adaptive mechanism, but also a dangerous one, because what begins as survival can become a prison. When you're always the entertainer, you begin to feel that you don't have the right to be anything else. That if you're not performing, people won't love you. That your value depends entirely on your ability to be light, even when your soul is heavy. And so you keep going, joke after joke, even when your insides are crumbling. This dissonance between the image you project and the pain you carry is what creates emotional fragmentation. Jung called it splitting of the psyche, and it leads to a deep, often invisible form of loneliness. Because even when surrounded by people, you don't feel seen. They love the mask, they laugh with the persona, but they don't know the real you. In fact, you may not even know the real you anymore. You've buried your sadness so deeply that even you've stopped acknowledging it. The first step toward healing is to recognize that humor is not your enemy, but it is not your identity either. Humor can be a tool, a gift, a bridge, but it cannot be your home. Jung believed that true individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to embrace all parts of ourselves, even the ones we've locked away, especially those. That means giving yourself permission to be sad, to be serious, to be quiet, to not be on. And this is terrifying for many, because if you've spent your life as the comic relief, What happens when you stop being funny? Will people still love you? Will they stay? Will they understand? Here's the truth. The right people will. And more importantly, you will begin to love yourself, not for what you give to others, but for who you are when no one's watching. The sadness behind the smile is not a weakness. It's a signal, a call inward. And Jung would say, follow it. Go into the shadow. Listen to the parts of yourself you've ignored. Ask the questions no one ever asked you. What hurts? What's been left unspoken? What are you afraid will happen if you stop performing? Because once you begin to answer those questions, something profound happens. The laughter doesn't stop. It just changes. It becomes rooted in something real, not a deflection, but a celebration. You no longer use humor to avoid pain. You use it to transform it. You can still be funny. You can still light up the room. But now, you also have access to your full emotional range. You can be quiet and still feel valuable. You can cry and still feel worthy. You can be a whole human, not just a highlight reel of jokes and smiles. There's something important we often overlook about the funny one in the room. They're not just trying to make others laugh. They're trying to stay afloat. Their humor isn't always play. Sometimes it's a life raft. When Carl Jung spoke about the persona, the social mask we wear to function in the world, he warned that identifying too much with that mask creates alienation. You become trapped in your role. And for those whose role is humor, the danger is that nobody ever thinks to ask if they're okay. After all, how could they not be? They're always smiling. But laughter, in this context, becomes a defense mechanism, one so deeply internalized that even the person using it may not realize what they're protecting. Beneath the well-timed jokes and animated stories is often a lifetime of emotional suppression. They learned early on that being vulnerable wasn't safe. That sadness made others uncomfortable. That if they wanted connection, they'd have to earn it by lightening the mood, so they became skilled at it. So skilled, in fact, that even they began to confuse their performance with their personality. But Jung would say, when the mask is too tight, it starts to suffocate the soul beneath. When your identity is based on a single emotional function, being funny, being agreeable, being strong, the other parts of you decay in the shadows. The child in you that wanted to cry, the teenager that needed to be held, the adult who longs to say, I'm not okay. All of that gets buried under performance. And slowly, that burial becomes internalized as shame. Shame for feeling too much. Shame for not being the person others expect. Shame for needing space to fall apart. This shame is often invisible from the outside. The world doesn't see the pressure these individuals carry. Instead, they're celebrated, adored for their charm, their wit, their ability to lift others. And so the performer continues. Even when they're exhausted, even when they're hurting, even when the joy they offer others is no longer accessible to themselves. One of the most painful signs that a person has over-identified with their humorous persona is emotional numbness. They can make others laugh, but they no longer feel connected to the laughter themselves. The light they shine outward doesn't touch them internally. They become a mirror for joy, but not a participant in it. Jung would recognize this as psychic disconnection, the soul splitting off from its center. The outward life and the inward truth no longer match. Another sign is the inability to receive support. These individuals are often the caretakers in their circles, the ones others lean on, the ones who hold the emotional energy of a room, but ask them to open up, to talk about their pain, to allow someone else to carry them. They can't, or rather, they don't know how. Vulnerability feels like a betrayal of the identity they've built. If they're not the strong, funny one, who are they? And more terrifyingly, will anyone stay if they show what's beneath? This fear runs deep. It's the fear of abandonment, rejection, of becoming too much. It comes from childhood wounds, relational traumas, cultural conditioning, all of which teach us that emotions are dangerous, especially for those who were rewarded only when they smiled. So they learn to suppress, to distract, to perform. And they carry that into adulthood, unaware that this mask is now a cage. But Jung's work gives us a pathway out. He taught that the process of individuation, the path to becoming whole, begins with the integration of the shadow. That means we must not only acknowledge the parts of ourselves we've rejected, but allow them into the light. If you are the funny one, ask yourself, what am I hiding? What am I afraid people will see if I stop performing? What does my laughter protect? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. Because the truth is, you are more than your humor. You are more than your role. You are a full spectrum of experience: joy, pain, beauty, sorrow, depth. And when you begin to embrace that, your relationships deepen. Your self-respect returns. Your laughter becomes real again. Not a shield, but an honest expression. And here's something powerful. The people who truly love you don't need you to be on all the time. In fact, they want to know the real you. They want to be there for you, not just when you are making them laugh, but when you're falling apart. Let them. That's where real connection begins, in the raw, unfiltered moments where the mask comes off. Jung would say that healing begins in the place where you stop pretending, where you meet yourself fully, with all your contradictions and scars, and choose to stay. You don't need to abandon your humor, but you do need to let it coexist with the parts of you that hurt, that cry, that break. Integration means allowing the full human experience to exist, not just what's socially acceptable. So if you're the funny one, know this: you are not alone. Many carry the same silent burden, but you don't have to carry it forever. You are allowed to take the mask off. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say, today I don't feel like performing. And if you're someone who loves a person like this, look deeper. Don't be fooled by the laughter. Ask the real questions. Offer presence, not just applause. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do for someone who always makes you laugh is to sit with them in silence and let them feel safe enough to cry. Because behind every bright smile, there might be a storm waiting for permission to be seen. And when that storm is met with compassion, it finally begins to clear. There's a strange cruelty in being loved only for the part of you that hides the rest. When you're always the one lifting others, making them laugh, making them feel seen, but rarely feeling seen yourself, you begin to wonder if anyone truly knows you at all. And that loneliness is the kind that doesn't scream. It just settles into your bones like a quiet, familiar weight. Carl Jung called this the suffering of the divided self, when who you are and who you present to the world no longer match. It's not just sadness that haunts the funny ones. It's invisibility. When you are the entertainer, the comic relief, people often stop looking beyond the punchline. You become a function in their lives, the one who brings levity, the one who never complains, the one who makes others forget their problems. But who helps you forget yours? Who sees your silence when the laughter dies? Jung believed that the more we disown parts of ourselves, the more fragmented we become. And that fragmentation shows up in strange ways. You begin to lose the ability to be present with yourself. You avoid stillness because in silence, the pain you've buried comes knocking. You keep moving, talking, performing, not out of joy, but because the alternative feels unbearable. Rest becomes a threat. Authenticity becomes a risk. This is why so many happy people collapse in private, because the internal world and external world are at war. The mask says, I'm fine, but the body remembers the moments when you weren't. The nervous system holds the grief, the shame, the helplessness. And when you deny those emotions long enough, they don't disappear. They become symptoms: anxiety, insomnia, exhaustion, emotional detachment. Jung warned us that when the unconscious is ignored, it doesn't stay silent. It speaks through the body, through mood, through suffering. Another side effect of living as the funny one is emotional distrust. You've spent so long protecting others from your pain that you've forgotten how to let someone in. Vulnerability doesn't come naturally anymore. Every time someone asks how you're doing, the instinctive answer is, "I'm good." Even when you're not, especially when you're not. Because the moment you let the truth slip out, the grief, the emptiness, the numbness, it feels like betrayal, like you've broken the image others love you for. But here's the problem. If people only love your mask, you will always feel alone behind it. Jung believed that the true goal of life is not happiness, but wholeness. And wholeness demands that you let yourself be known. Not just the light, but the shadow too. Your sadness, your confusion, your silence, all of it has a right to exist. More than that, it has something to teach you. One of the most overlooked aspects of the clown archetype is its deep connection to pain. Historically, clowns and jesters were truth-tellers. They used humor to speak what others were too afraid to say. Their laughter had edge. Their performance carried darkness. The modern version of this archetype, the funny friend, the life of the party, often forgets this. They've been reduced to comic relief, stripped of complexity. But beneath that humor still lives a profound sensitivity, a gift for observation, an emotional intelligence that allows them to read a room, shift its energy, carry it, often at their own expense. And yet, even in this exhaustion, they struggle to let go of the role. Because if they're not funny, who are they? What value do they bring? This is where the wound runs deepest. It's not just about hiding pain, it's about believing that your pain makes you unlovable. That if you stop performing, people will leave. That being seen means being rejected. But the truth is, being known is the only real way to be loved. And to be known, you must risk showing your whole self, even the parts you were taught to hide. Jung spoke often about the necessity of turning inward, of facing the parts of ourselves we fear. This includes the part of you that feels empty when the jokes don't land, the part that feels fake after every forced smile, the part that cries after a party because, once again, you were surrounded by people but felt completely alone. These aren't weaknesses, they're invitations, invitations to stop hiding, to stop living only in performance, and to step into your own humanity, raw, honest, imperfect. The moment you begin to let others see your truth, something shifts. Not everyone will understand. Some will prefer the mask. Let them go. But the ones who stay, they are your real circle. They are the ones who want all of you, not just the highlights. And here's something else. You don't have to wait for someone else to see you. You can begin the work yourself. You can sit with your sadness without labeling it wrong. You can hold your own silence without trying to fill it. You can laugh and still cry in the same breath. That's not contradiction. That's wholeness. Because in the end, the goal is not to stop being funny. It's to stop using humor to hide. Your laughter can still be sacred. It can still be light, but let it come from integration, not avoidance. Let it rise from the depths of someone who has felt everything and still chooses to smile, not as a distraction, but as a declaration. I have known pain. I have walked through shadow, and I am still here. There's something undeniably beautiful about the person who has suffered deeply and still chooses to smile. But that beauty becomes tragic when the smile is the only part of them the world ever sees. Carl Jung believed that we are not here to be perfect. We are here to be whole. And wholeness cannot exist where truth is denied, even if that denial is wrapped in humor, charisma, or charm. The truth is, many of the people who make us laugh the hardest are carrying the kind of pain we don't see, not because they are deceitful, but because they are practiced, because they've had years, sometimes decades, of learning to convert sorrow into performance. They've mastered the art of being needed, admired, adored, all while starving internally for someone to notice that behind the jokes they are still bleeding. Jung understood this duality intimately. He wrote about the wounded healer, the one who heals others because they cannot bear to see in others what they cannot heal in themselves. The funny person often plays this role. They bring light to others, hoping that maybe, in doing so, they'll earn some warmth in return. But healing doesn't come from performance. It comes from presence, from being with what is, not what is expected. And so the final transformation for the funny one is perhaps the hardest: to risk being real, to sit in a room and say nothing, to resist the urge to fix the mood, to allow the discomfort of being seen in silence. This is not easy, especially when your identity has been built on being the one who makes everything okay. But ask yourself this: when was the last time someone made you laugh and then asked, "But how are you really?" When was the last time you let someone see the part of you that isn't holding it together? Jung would say, that's the moment of integration. That's when the mask begins to crack and the true self emerges. Not the image, not the persona, but the soul beneath it all. And that soul is not shallow. It's not simple. It is layered with memory, wounds, longings, and dreams. It remembers every time you stayed quiet instead of asking for help. It remembers the moments when your sadness was ignored, when your depth was too much for others, and it's still waiting for you to stop apologizing for being human. Because underneath the jokes, there's a depth of feeling you've barely touched. And that depth is sacred. It's where your art lives, your voice, your truth. It's not the enemy, it's your source. You don't need to be less emotional to be loved. You don't need to entertain to deserve connection. You don't need to filter your pain to be worthy of healing. The funny one is often the saddest, not because they are weak, but because they have carried so much alone for so long that laughter became the only safe outlet. But what if healing is no longer about holding it together? What if it's about finally allowing it to fall apart? Carl Jung would remind us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your healing begins the moment you stop pretending, the moment you stop turning your wounds into punchlines and start treating them like the messages they are, the moment you stop hiding behind the idea that you must always be strong, charming, or okay, and instead admit that you're tired, that you're scared, that you're still trying to find your way home. And that's the thing. You are allowed to come home to yourself. You are allowed to cry, to be quiet, to not explain, to not entertain. You are allowed to ask for help, to rest, to be real. Because no matter how well you perform, you will always feel empty if no one sees the truth of you. But the moment you take the risk to show that truth, even just to yourself, the healing begins. You reconnect with your own soul. And from that place, your laughter changes. It becomes whole. It becomes healing. Not just for others, but finally, for you. So if you're watching this and recognizing yourself, the jokes, the performance, the exhaustion behind the smile, know that you are not alone. So many people walk this path. And the courage it takes to step off the stage and into your authentic self is no small thing. It's not weakness, it's the beginning of everything real. Let this be the moment you choose differently. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to become someone real. Not louder, truer, not stronger, softer, not funnier, freer. And if this message resonated with you, share your experience. Tell your story in the comments. You never know who else is watching and feeling the same quiet ache. You never know whose healing might begin with your voice. If you've made it this far, thank you for being open, for being willing to look deeper, for giving yourself permission to feel. Let's keep the conversation going. Subscribe for more reflections on Carl Jung, shadow work, emotional healing, and the hidden parts of human nature we're all still learning to embrace. If you found this helpful, give it a like. It helps others find their way to this message too. And remember, the funniest person in the room might be carrying the deepest sadness, but maybe, just maybe, that person is ready to be seen.